This is something that you can always rely on. If you get stuck, go back a step. Think about what is the easier thing to solve. One thing that I notice a lot is this kind of like, I would call it dirty rendering. When you're trying to describe a form, like imagine this is like a flat surface. If you suddenly start adding things that introduce a lot of like variety to it, now like suddenly like it doesn't read as flat anymore. And so sometimes people will have these like random brushes that you kind of like, oh, I'm just using it, but maybe it's the wrong shape. You're trying to convey stone, but then you're using a brush that has a completely arbitrary shape. It happens with trees, it happens with a lot of different elements. What I do when I'm painting, I do my best to be free, but whenever I'm stuck, I can always rely on this. So if you are having trouble with, like lightning stuff, I really suggest that you kind of like look into getting like a 3D model to use as a reference. I will show you some stuff. One thing you can always do is you can download 3D models. You can get them from museums. Having something like this, you go, okay, this is something that's similar to the drawing I have. It doesn't have to be close. It just has to be so you can get like an approximation. And with just like a few sets of items, right, we can actually really get a good sense of how we could light this character. Even before, like working through and doing this painting, you can make decisions about how you are going to be illuminating this, especially when you're working from imagination, because sometimes you just don't have like a proper reference that's really like fitting, because you might have some crazy lighting setup. It happens a lot when you're doing fantasy illustrations. What I'm doing here is I'm just setting up this idea of like where could a bounce be. So here I have it. So something close enough to the drawing. The first thing is you need to get into a situation where you can actually make judgments. Like if you're rendering in a way that is like kind of sloppy, instead of like going in with like with a round brush, something like this, right? Where like, okay, I want to have all this be dark and I need to do all these things. We read change, right? It reads to change its forms, even though mentally we can kind of abstract away from this being like it's a big hole, like a big shadow in the shape, and so we can kind of ignore it. It's something that you eventually have to come and paint over. So instead of like slowly approaching and like trying to do everything with your brushstrokes all at the same time, like, so it can work, right? Like it's not a illegal thing to do. It can take a really long time before we actually can get a feeling of like, will this light work or not? Especially like if you imagine that I don't have created an accurate reference. So here. Now I get this, right? One thing that happens is that because I have it so simple, right? It's like it's just two values, right? I'm looking to make a mark that gives me the suggestion of like where things are. I can make a judgment whether this feels right already. When it's just these two tones, it's actually really easy to model because I can just focus on the edge itself. So instead of like trying to do all these things at once, like say if I had to do a brushstroke that describes all these things, like the modeling, the separation of light, the reflected light at the same time, like it is just too many objects to handle in my head at the same time. And now because it's just a two value thing, you see how like quickly I can just come in and I can erase out. I can change the light quite easily, quite rapidly. Maybe like I want to wrap it a bit more around the head, right? There's a lot of things that you can do here that makes it so that the painting actually comes together faster. So if you can get used to just taking this little step back, right? We're trying to approach our painting in a more direct way, a more simple way. If you can just take this tiny step back and like and ignore the idea of like, oh, you need to describe everything at once. Once you have the structure, you can get fancy, right? Then you can do the fancy brushstrokes. People will believe, for whatever reason, that you did it the first try, right? Like because that's how you got this idea that when I'm painting, I should have a brush like this, and then like I make a brushstroke that describes all these things at once, and you just can't get it why it's not happening. We want to slowly develop the structures in the painting so that they really start coming together. Again, here, and you see how like already now like there's a lot of things that I'm actually reading, and I'm just doing the modeling of the edge after I did the hard edge selections. So now you go, okay, but I want to have the bounce light as well, right? I want to have this red light coming through and kind of like illuminating. It's the same problem, but now in reverse, right? We just take if you could just take it one step at a time. I know this is too strong, so fade that a bit. But it's the same problem, right? And each time you do this, yes. the modeling it becomes quite easy actually. And this is something where like you don't have to paint like this strictly with yourself and like approaching it so you do each slide every time. But imagine then like you have this we have maybe something below that's like also coming out, right? You can treat each bounce as its own thing and come in and do these things one at a time, just one at a time. And this is something that you can always rely on. If you get stuck, go back a step. Think about what is the easier thing to solve. Because if we're trying to, if I'm trying to draw a hair in this man, like you see, like now I have this two-tone setup that I can then, it's like the rendering actually, again, it's just a bit faster to go in and kind of go, okay, what's the difference? How are these things? Say I have we do like a hairball, right? Again, like I am just solving the gradient, right? So we already know with this, like what is the modeling, what is the rendering. I want this material to have a feeling, like I want it to be more hairy. I don't want it to be like a golf ball. If I just come in here, now I can just lean in and by, just rendering in at the edge, by adding a bit of texture at the edge, suddenly you get all this thing for free, right? Like because it's already leaning on the structure that you already created. And I need to not get caught away in like trying to render this hairball out. So this is a general thing that I see a lot of portfolios where like the rendering becomes unclean because either like the brush strokes that you simply that either doing too little, they're not describing something. The whole idea by saying what is changing, right? Like what is the focus on that is that it allows us to really gradually control where the eye goes. So if you're looking to improve